November is Native Heritage Month, and of course, a holiday that many celebrate as Thanksgiving. All week, we take a look at people and places across Turtle Island. This is a special edition of the ICT Newscast.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.
The ICT Newscast is sponsored by the Indian Land Tenure Foundation, a nonprofit organization serving American Indian nations and people in the recovery and control of their rightful homelands. On the web at iltf.org.
Support for the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez comes from the Arizona PBS studios in Phoenix at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communications at Arizona State University. November is Native Heritage Month and a special edition of the ICT Newscast. I'm Mark Trahant. Thank you for joining us. President Joe Biden was the first U.S. leader to proclaim Indigenous Peoples Day as a holiday just 2 years ago. But the celebration began in Berkeley, California in 1992 as part of the 500th anniversary after Christopher Columbus arrived in the hemisphere. The day recognizes the resilience and diversity of Indigenous people in the United States. I have more about the holiday itself. Did you know the word American used to mean indigenous? In the 1590s, an American was defined as someone from the Western Hemisphere and one of the original inhabitants. It wasn't until the 1740s that the word was expanded to include all the people of the Americas. In 1992, a group of more than 100 indigenous elders and scholars met at Taos Pueblo and drafted a vision about the next 500 years. Some of the words: "We, the indigenous people of this red quarter of Mother Earth, have survived 500 years of genocide, ethnocide, ecocide, racism, oppression, colonization, and Christianization. These excesses of Western civilization resulted from contempt for Mother Earth and all our relations, contempt for women, elders, children, and Native peoples, and a contempt for a future beyond the present human generation. Despite this, we are still here. We are still here. Native people over the next 500 years must maintain," the statement went on, "Native peoples over the next 500 years must maintain our status as distinct political and cultural communities. Indian nations expect the world community to honor and enforce treaties that recognize tribal property and sovereignty. Sovereignty is an inherent right of Indian nations to govern all actions within our own countries based upon traditional systems and laws that arise from the people themselves. Sovereignty includes the right of Native nations to freely live and develop socially, economically, culturally, spiritually, and politically." The document called for the right to culture, territory, and wealth. It also made a generational promise, a bond with all the world's peoples who understand the relationship and responsibility to all aspects of creation. It also made a generational promise, a bond with all the world's peoples who understand their relationship and responsibility to all aspects of the creation, and a future of global friendship and the integrity of diverse cultures. Our visions was a historic gathering of 100 Native writers, artists, and wisdom keepers at Taos Pueblo. It was co-chaired by Suzanne Schoen Harjo and Oren Lyons and sponsored by the Morningstar Institute and the 1992 Alliance. That promise included the coming generation of Native people, something that we celebrate this week. Indeed, there is a documentary evidence of that coming generation, stories that were affirmed by the work of Matika Wilbur. She is an author, photographer, and podcast host. Her book, A Perfect Vehicle for this week, is Project 562. Matika developed the collection after years of photographing and interviewing Indigenous people from over 500 federally recognized tribes. ICT's Paris Wise has this interview with her.
So you are the author and photographer of this book, Project 562, which is hitting shelves today. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's really exciting.
What is Project 562?
Well, Project 562 is a year, it took I started in 2012. It's taken me many, many years of traveling around the country with the goal of visiting more than 562 federally recognized tribes in the United States. When I started the project, that's was the original goal. And then as time went on, I also would visit with urban Native communities, with international Native communities, with tribes that are still fighting for recognition. The plenary power of Congress is always in flux. And so I spent 8 years. I started in Washington and went to Oregon and California, what is now known as Oregon and California, and around the country, really, in circles multiple times, and into Alaska several times. And I photographed about 1,200 people, and I went to about 450 tribal communities, and I interviewed my subjects and talked with folks about a wide range of topics, from sovereignty to self-determination, nation building, environmental justice, climate justice. We talked about Indigenous feminisms and rematriation and decolonization. And, we had conversations about love and death and trauma and healing and, everything in between. So the book that's coming out this week is a collection of those stories and interviews that are collated into what we're calling profiles.
Wow, well, what a journey. I mean, you even sold everything you owned, you got rid of your apartment. What was that decision-making process and why you wanted to embark on this?
I didn't have enough funding to be on the road and to also keep an apartment. And so I had to kind of make the decision, which was one or the other. So in the beginning, I spent quite a bit of time in my Honda. I traveled initially in a Honda, and I relied on the kindness of Indian country. I slept on couches and went to community functions, and it was really supported by the community. And then as time went on, I was able to gather more support. We launched a second Kickstarter. Foundations decided to support the work that I was doing, and then I was able to upgrade to living in an RV, which was definitely, van life was a lot of fun. That's how I did it.
This book is, photography. It's a physical book. Why was that the format you chose to tell these stories?
I, over the years, have worked in several different mediums. I had a blog for many years that I published on weekly. On my Project 562 website, we published hundreds of entries. I had a YouTube channel for a while, and I think we made about 70 films, short films. And I also have a podcast called All My Relations. And it's really an incredible platform. We have a lot of listeners. We just reached the 1 million listener threshold. So that's really exciting to have a podcast to discuss relationality and all its complexity. And, I've also, with this project, developed curriculum. So we have, like a 40-page curriculum guide that accompanies the publication of the book. And, the book is, a really great, tangible, it's like a tangible object that I can give to people that really encapsulates, so many different stories and people that I've encountered along the way. Of course, I've also done exhibitions, right? I have an exhibition up right now in Santa Monica. That's a 72-piece collection that will be traveling and going to New Orleans and then to Michigan. And so that's another exhibition, it's been in exhibition form several times in several different locations. But yeah, the book is certainly a new vessel to carry the stories, and I'm pretty excited about it.
As a really accomplished storyteller, you mentioned you had already published preliminary content for this project, and of course your All My Relations podcast is incredible. What do you really want people to take away from this book?
The book is for me is what I think of as like my love letter to Indian country. It's all of these incredible stories, and really it's a time capsule, right? Because these are people that I photographed 7 years ago or 5 years ago or 3 years ago, and they represent people where they were at on that day of their journey. For me, like, I started this project because I want our children to have the opportunity to see themselves reflected properly. I think that it's wildly unjust that our students don't have the opportunity to open up a textbook, a 500-page book that has adequate representation of our people. And, I started this project for that very reason, because I was a teacher at the tribal school of my res, because I wanted to be able to provide a resource to my own students that could show them how incredibly beautiful and intelligent and resilient and thriving and human, right, we are, and in all of the many ways that and forms that we come in as Indigenous people, right? We're not a monolith, and so we deserve to see the uniqueness and celebrate our own people. Our children need that. And so for me, when I made this book, I made it for that purpose. And I feel, like blessed and humbled and honored to have been able to bear witness to so many incredible people and stories and communities, and to get to share some of that with people.
You're literally bringing everyone in with you on this journey to be exposed and learn about these communities. I can't imagine how difficult it must have been to pick and choose what was going to make it in the book, just based off of every interaction and story that you came across.
In a perfect world, I'll get to publish 4 volumes and then everybody can see the whole collection. And if not, then I'll eventually make a website where it all will live.
Well, thank you so much, Matika Wilbur, for taking the time to talk about Project 562.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
LaDonna Harris was one of the first Native American women to run for the office of vice president. She's got a long career, and we talked with her daughter, Laura Harris.
Laura Harris has led Americans for Indian Opportunities for 25 years. It's the organization started by her mother, LaDonna, in 1970. Simply put, it's a leadership development organization, but over the years, it's become much more. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you, Shirley. It's good to see you.
So in a nutshell, what is Americans for Indian Opportunities?
It's never stayed the same. We're celebrating our 53rd anniversary this year, and we've worked on just about every issue there is. Mom really started working in the area of urban Indians. She was appointed by President Johnson to the National Council on Indian Opportunity out of the White House that Vice President Humphrey chaired. And out of that work, she thought that, urbans were invisible. And so she spent a lot of time holding hearings around the country in cities to learn more about this invisible population. It's like 50 years later, and we're still kind of invisible, but AIO's come full circle, and we're working on urban issues again. But Americans for Indian Opportunity advocates for Indigenous rights here in the United States and around the world. And we've done that in many different ways, like I said, but it's through Indigenous values-based leadership development, hosting several Indigenous networks, national and international networks, and we're also working to help indigenize other people's leadership programs. So we haven't had a new cohort of the Ambassadors Program recently because we've been working with other organizations to help them include Indigenous values and Indigenous worldview in their leadership programs. That's been really fascinating. And also, we have been providing a lot of what we call Indian 101 beyond cultural competency. I think Black Lives Matter and COVID really built people's interest in learning more about other peoples, and especially particularly people of color. So we've provided Indian 101, we call it, to foundations, corporations, anybody who wants to do business in Indian country or wants to know more. Of course, we feel like we're filling a vacuum in the US education system. And what we found over our years trying to change policy in Washington, D.C., is you can't change policy unless you educate the decision makers. So you could have 3 PhDs and still not know that tribes were governments within the federal system, and just exactly what tribal sovereignty allows tribes to undertake. And so we found in order to make change, you have to educate people. And we've been very successful at that. My mother started this as a very simple presentation on an easel, and she'd draw some funny looking pictures. But we've upgraded a little bit. We have a slideshow now, and really been able to, I think about 3,500 people last year we were able to touch. And that's a big part, building awareness, changing the tragedy narrative, and providing information about contemporary Indigenous peoples is what we feel is part of our mission. And I think that has a lot to do with the 350 ambassadors who've gone through the program now. They represent about 40 states, 150 different tribes, and 6 countries. And of course, the Maori in Aotearoa, New Zealand, they've actually started their own leadership program. So of that 350, 150 are from New Zealand. But those values really resonated. And we found that our travels throughout the world, that Indigenous communities really feel like those values resonate for their culture. And we found them to be fairly universal.
The other thing that I would imagine it would be important for all of these leaders is to meet each other.
Yes, what we find that's very different from other sorts of leadership programs, Shirley, you may get maybe one Native American to participate in a national program. I've been that one, or I've been the runner-up to that one to participate in those programs, and you get some little nuggets. But really what we found is it doesn't compute back to your home, back to your environment, your community. What do Native American leaders need, both tribal, nonprofit, urban leaders? And what we found is really centering them in their cultural identity. That's what makes a good leader. And I think that's probably universal as well, not just for Indigenous peoples, but knowing who you are and where you came from and being proud of that and being able to lead from that. We've been told so many times, Native Americans and people of color and women, that we're less than because of our culture, because of our identity or our gender. But in fact, it's absolutely the opposite. We are more because of our culture. And when we bring our cultural identity and our values to everything we do, and particularly to work, whether that's in a corporation or a foundation, that we're a stronger leader and that we have a lot more to contribute. We think that these values, we affectionately call them the 4 R's, or Hayaroquet. Hayaroquet in Comanche means the number 4, but it also means just right. This is just right. And these 4 R's, relationships, responsibility, reciprocity, and redistribution, these are human values, but we think that folks need to be reminded of them.
That was Laura Harris from Americans for Indian Opportunity. There was so much activity in the 1970s. There was a modern treaty in Alaska, the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, and fishing wars in Washington state. Finally, we end this special edition with another iconic story, Wounded Knee, and this year's 50th anniversary. We have this story from ICT Shirley Snavy and Stuart Huntington.
The song of the American Indian movement mingled with eruptions of celebratory gunfire at the very place where hundreds of Lakota people were slaughtered by U.S. soldiers in 1890. and where AIM activists, including the late Carter Camp, took a stand in 1973.
Today we're still here. Today we're strong because of our relatives who fought here in 73. Today we're proud to be who we are as Native people, Indigenous people of this land. I want to say won't be like
Bill Means, brother of the late AIM leader Russell Means, who helped lead the occupation, reminded the crowd not to forget the 19th century massacre.
There's almost 300 men, women, and children in that grave behind us. Every time we go by here, we're reminded about the United States government, what they did to our people. And so that's the reason why we resist.
Then Means switched to talk about 1973 and the present.
Remember, we came here for the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty. We didn't just come here to raise hell. We had to make a statement to tell the world that Indians are still alive. This is still our land, and the Black Hills are not for sale.
The 1973 occupation began as a protest against the heavy-handed tribal government of Dick Wilson, but evolved into a 71-day standoff against federal law enforcement and demands for treaty rights. In the end, at least 3 people were killed. Veterans of the occupation gathered to swap stories.
I felt like the spirit, the energy brought us here, me, for sure. And I was looking for something, to validate ourselves, our own self-searching. And in a time when it wasn't good to be Indian, in my time, or my youth. And so, for better or worse, I realized that you have to be who you are, and you should be who you are.
The federal marshals had all the high grounds, and we had bunkers and support teams down here in the middle, and trading post was over here in our security headquarters. And so it's all gone now. You know what strikes me about it is as soon as it ended, the federal people came in and they bulldozed all the main structures and buildings here. And I think they were trying to erase this out of history, that it would go away and people would forget about the massacre that happened originally and the rebellion that happened here again, because people haven't forgotten. And so coming back here, I think, is a way of rebuilding that struggle and the structures and the fight that took place here to keep the memory alive and to care for future generations. And so this is a real strong statement, I think, today, everybody being here for the 50th anniversary, the ones of us that are still around.
Ken Tiger served in Vietnam before joining the 73 occupation.
Looking back on it, there was a lot of similarities. There was a lot of farmers in Vietnam who didn't want anything to do with the war. They just wanted to take care of their property, their families, their communities. And basically, that's what the people here were trying to do too. But there's fractions within the government who were trying to take what they had, what little they had to begin with. They were trying to take it away from them, and they were trying to tell them how to live, what to do, and things like that. And that's not the way it should be.
He brought a picture of himself from 73 on his phone and pointed to the spot where, back then, he dug community toilets. Willard Carlson remembers the era as a tough time for natives.
There was a lot of things that was happening in Indian country everywhere, like heavy-handed police, white bartender killed a friend of mine, highway patrols took an Indian man and executed him on Highway 101, Arcata, California.
And he remembers getting ready on the West Coast to join the occupation.
And I went off recruiting warriors and weapons, and my mother, she had about 8 rifles she gave me from her family, or her man at that time, just as long as they were operational. So we drove over here, and it was a very dangerous time, very bad.
Looking ahead, things are perhaps better, but the work is not done.
It is still sad that we unfortunately face some of the same struggles today, and so that's what keeps many of us as helpers and continuing to show up and help where we can for future generations, and of course honoring those that have gone before us.
The fight is not over. The fight continues to this day, and I think it'll continue for the rest of our lives. generation through generation. I mean, we're still here today, 50 years later, we're still here today. A lot of our people, we continue to do our daily battles with, the government, with, the everyday life, the struggles, the different things that basically the system is basically set up for us to fail as Indigenous people. And we continue to fight that to this day and prove them wrong. And we'll continue to prove them wrong, every day.
In Wounded Knee, South Dakota with Shirley Snavy, Stuart Huntington, ICT News.
Around the world, the holiday is celebrated differently. In the United States, it's Heritage Month. In Canada, Indigenous people are marked at the summer solstice and then again in October for Thanksgiving. In much of the world, Indigenous Peoples Day is August 9th, set aside by the United Nations. And that's a slice of our Indigenous world. For all the latest, visit ictnews.org. From all of us in the newsroom, have a great holiday. Stay safe, my relatives.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.